Welcome back to another powerful episode of the Service First podcast, where we explore the power of putting a commitment to others first in business and in life. Join us as we sit down with industry leaders, entrepreneurs, and everyday people who are making a positive impact through their commitment to service. Get ready to be inspired, learn from the best, and discover how you too can put service first. Well, yeah, man. Thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me.
Appreciate you doing it.
Of course.
Yeah, like I was just saying, like people like yourself with restaurant backgrounds are always super interesting to talk to.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, it's what we committed our lives and careers to, and so I just love hearing other people's perspective on the business and this crazy thing that so many of us have committed a ton of time to.
Yeah.
So yeah, I guess just get started, quick introduction. Davey Rabinowitz, hopefully I pronounced that correctly.
Good. Yeah, you did.
My understanding, and you and I have gotten to know each other a little bit over the last couple of years, but you've been in Bozeman for quite some time and owned your own restaurant, and now I've kind of migrated over to a support role in the restaurant hospitality space. But yeah, if you don't mind, how'd you give us like little family background, your personal background, where you grew up, that type of thing?
Yeah. So Davey Rabinowitz, I've been in Bozeman since 2008. I grew up in Cleveland, Ohio. And then I actually moved to Bozeman in 2008 to attend Montana State. I never really thought I was going to be in the restaurant industry. I always kind of thought I was going to kind of follow in my dad's footsteps in some sort of like medical career. So I actually went to school majoring in biotechnology. I kind of wanted to do more like pharmaceutical stuff and kind of travel the world. But I wanted to get kind of a job and just, get some extra money on the side. So I honestly, I just applied for a dishwasher job at Ted's, that first year that it opened in Bozeman. And slowly but surely, I kind of started falling in love with Ted's. And it wasn't necessarily like the restaurant I fell in love with. It was kind of the overall feeling I got when, the camaraderie in the kitchen, how everyone really worked together and they had fun. And I kind of was just blown away by like what the hospitality industry had to offer. So was doing that for about a year, and then I slowly realized that I wanted to do more, and so I talked to MSU quite a bit, and then I switched my major over to sustainable foods. And I wanted to know more about food culture. I wanted to know more about plant culture. I just wanted to know more about what food had to offer. And so when Starkey's kind of reopened after the explosion in February of 2009, I moved out of Ted's, and then I went over to that kitchen and started like cooking full time. And I owe a lot of my success to Glenn and Kathy Stark. They were just great facilitators, great operators, but ultimately they were just great human beings. They really helped me kind of understand the passion that goes along with, working in the kitchens and working in the front of the house, just kind of the day-to-day operations with running a restaurant. And so kind of by the age of 20, I really was focusing more on kitchen culture, restaurant culture than I was school. And I realized that I need to make a change sooner than later to kind of figure out like if this is the full path and direction that I wanted to go down. And so I stayed on at Starkey's, did full-time hours. I was still doing part-time school. And then I made the leap to sign up for culinary school. And I was looking at other like multiple places, but the Pacific Northwest was really where I wanted to go. At that time, 2011, Portland just kept kind of calling to me internally. So my dad actually, he lives in Billings. He came and picked me up in Bozeman, and we drove out there for the weekend. And I'll never forget that weekend. We pulled in. Met with the culinary school, and of course my dad left the car running, so the battery died, and we were downtown Portland trying to figure out a jump start to get the car back up and running. But yeah, and so then I kind of made that decision. I wanted to go to Portland, but I think what the nail in the coffin was for me is we ate at this restaurant on the Columbia River, and it was called Salty's. And I'll never forget it. I had this like insane coconut nage. And for those that you don't know what nage is, it's just a phenomenal, it's kind of a broth that's nappe-esque. Nappe is a thickened broth. And it really kind of blew my mind of like what I could achieve in Portland. And at that time, Portland really kind of created this food truck scene. And it was really, like, in my personal opinion, and people might call me wrong on this, but I think Portland really innovated what you could do with food trucks. Mm-hmm. And so you walk downtown in Portland and there's these massive corner lots just allocated to food trucks, 50, 60 trucks, and people are just there, and it's lively, and it's just, you could feel the whole vibe of that city based on like literally the food culture.
Yeah.
And and this was the cool thing about it was you have legendary chefs like Gregory Gourdet, Vitaly Paley, Greg Higgins. I mean, these guys are just, they're the godfathers and the newcomers, Gabriel Rucker of Portland. And that's kind of what I wanted to be a part of. So I made the leap, and in 2012, I officially moved out to Portland to attend culinary school. And it was scary, but I was so excited. I mean, there were just days, like I moved out a week before, no apartment, nothing. I just loaded my truck up. I was like, I'm doing it. And it was kind of short notice. And literally I got there and I found an apartment. And that first couple of weeks, like I walked the city streets every single night. I think I didn't get home till like 2 a.m. I was, just checking out late night pho spots, like really just indulging into the culture. And, for any young people out there listening right now, like that want to know more about food, just look at cities. Like cities tell a story through food culture. And that's what I found with Portland.
So you went there with no job lined up, nothing.
Nothing.
It's interesting to hear you talk about, like the food truck component of the industry, and how innovative like that can be, and how that's that part of that segment of the business can really like sometimes push the envelope. Yeah. How would you relate that, I guess, then moving forward from seeing that and how that can drive restaurant culture in a place like Portland, to then diving into like brick and mortar, full restaurant experience where I think obviously you can still be very innovative and push the envelope, but it's a very different format to operate, when you're doing a full brick and mortar and serving people in-house versus, 50 or 60 trucks in a parking lot.
Yeah. I mean, I think ultimately you kind of have to figure out like what's going to work best for you. Mm-hmm. I think food trucks, like they need to be lightning fast. You literally going up to the window, you should have food in your hands in 5 to 7 minutes. Where, I think brick and mortar, they apply more of an experience than it is just the plate of food. And where, again, food trucks, they really just supply great food, and that's what I love to see. And I think ultimately, like when it comes to food trucks, like I know what I'm going to get. When it comes to brick and mortars, I hope to know what I'm going to get. But ultimately, I just want to go into a brick and mortar and just feel that experience, feel the passion that they put into it. And I think food trucks, they're developing more into mobile units where they can not only supply like weddings and catering, right, but they can also they can go where the people want them to go. Brick and mortar, obviously you're staying put. So you have to, I've always said that, food, eating at a dining room table is the oldest tradition in the world. You come together, whether it's friends, family, strangers, but you're coming together for one common goal. And that's just sitting at a table, eating food, breaking bread, and just enjoying everyone's company. Food trucks is just more, it's easier, it's on the go. And, when I talk more about my time in Copenhagen, I ate at those hot dog stands like every day. They were so good, but it was just quick, and I knew what I was kind of gonna get.
So if you take the same operator, say a Portland food truck operator or a Copenhagen hot dog stand operator, and then they migrate or like develop and grow into a brick and mortar, do you think the expectations change from a customer perspective?
Yep.
Do you think that's fair?
I do. I really do. I mean, I think that, when you operate a food truck, that's kind of your ultimate alpha stage, right? Like you're kind of testing the market, you're figuring out what's working for you. And then when you kind of go into that brick and mortar, like, I think for me, at least, the expectation has to change, because I'm now sitting in your dining room table. I'm sitting in your house, I get to eat your food. And like, I want that full experience where if I'm coming to a food truck, it's more like going to an outside barbecue at someone's house, like you just get a cheeseburger, you kind of eat wherever you want to eat and kind of go from there. Whereas like if I came to your house for, Thanksgiving and I'm kind of going off a little bit, but I want to sit at your dining room table and I want to tell stories. Like I want to be a part of your family. I want to be a part of like what you came from and what you're putting on the table.
No, I agree. And it's tough because like I feel like there's so many cool and innovative and really delicious like food truck offerings out there, but then like these operators, they feel a pressure and understandably so. I mean, like I've worked in food trucks, like it's not the most enjoyable and consistent, and especially if you're in a place like Bozeman dealing with like wintertime operations is a pain in the ass. Like you have this like overriding pressure to like transition to brick and mortar eventually, but then you play by a whole different set of rules, and you can't necessarily translate everything that you did from the food truck operation into a brick and mortar restaurant, but I think people look at a food truck and they're like, oh my God, they've got the best smash burgers or street tacos or whatever. Like they would make a great restaurant, but they don't necessarily always translate like that.
Exactly. And I completely agree with that. I think like, food trucks, people have this expectation of like a smaller menu because that's all food trucks can handle, right? Where brick and mortars, you kind of have to, again, know your market a little bit more and kind of create the menu where you can get more people in at once. And that's, I think, the fine line with some food trucks going into brick and mortars is that, they have so much success on the truck. And then they go into the brick and mortar and there's just so much more on the business side of it than they maybe originally anticipated, or like this is where I faltered as a young chef is like, and I've kind of, as the years passed after we've closed, Bissell, my first restaurant, is that, physically and culinary wise, like skill wise, I was very much ready to open up my first restaurant, but mentally I was not. I was just too young. I needed more time on the business side of things to fully understand like what it took to run and operate a restaurant from day to day. And that's the same thing with a food truck, like food trucks, you look at your ROI on it and it's a solid ROI because, there's no
overhead.
Exactly.
Like, well, I mean, there's a lot lower overhead and less staff. And it's a microcosm of a restaurant.
Exactly.
So when you say that like mentally you needed more time to develop and like developing the business skills, do you mean like the financial side of the restaurant or team leadership and stuff like that? Or
I mean, both? I think it was a little bit of both, like obviously like all my food costing, everything, like obviously, I was fully aware of what was going on, but I think ultimately, when I talk about restaurants, when I talk about, restaurant culture, there's always one thing that's really, for me, that I miss the most, especially being out of it right now, is that it's the camaraderie I would feel every single day, and, when we first opened our restaurant, I was 25. I was 25 or 26, and I was still wanting to be one of the guys. And so that was my first mistake, was that, we'd be done with service and then I'd kind of go out with them for a little bit afterwards and have a beer and a shot. And, even my wife's like, Davey, you got to be careful with that because, you are the leader of the restaurant. If you have to make a tough decision, you now are kind of buddy buddies with these guys. Yep. And that's not a good look when you have to make a tough call. And I kind of just brushed that off my shoulder because, I think that we're in such a digital age, a social media age where, especially, I don't know, mid 2000s, chefs became kind of these new rock stars. Yep. And that's what a lot of people came to culinary school for. Like, so I'm kind of hopping around topics, but when I first went into culinary school, I would say about 40% of my class, they all wanted to be TV chefs. Like that's why they went to culinary school. It wasn't necessarily wanting to open up their own restaurant. They wanted to be on TV. Yeah. And when we graduated, I think we had like, I don't know, a 60% dropout rate. It was insane. And the reason being is, as we kind of progressed through these classes, they would stage at restaurants. And I'll never forget, this one guy came back. He's just like, dude, I worked at Le Pigeon and I think I shucked oysters for like 8 hours. I did nothing else. And I was like, how was it, man? Like, that's awesome. He's like, it was miserable. And a couple weeks later, he didn't show back up to culinary school. Yeah. And so moving forward, I never wanted to be a celebrity chef. I just wanted to cook really good food and have an awesome restaurant and like just really have a really good time in my life, doing food. But I just wasn't ready to let go of that buddy yet. And so that's kind of like was ultimately a lot of my downfall is mentally I wasn't ready to lead at quite at that point in my life.
Do you think that for those of you in going through culinary school that had the right mindset in the first place, not going there like wanting to be a TV chef and like making your way through the education successfully, do you think it prepared you adequately to go forward and like, I don't know, be a chef, like lead a restaurant kitchen? And I don't know, part two of that question, this is something that we've, volleyed back and forth a bunch in our company is like, what's the difference between a chef and a line cook?
Yeah. No, I think, I'll answer number two first and I'll go back into the culinary. A chef rarely cooks. A chef leads. A line cook executes. A chef is really kind of the day-to-day person that, and this is what I struggled with too. A chef should rarely pick up a knife on a day-to-day. It needs to oversee all operations, from the back of house to whatever their kind of their role is in that restaurant. Menu creation, organization on the menus, all of that stuff. When I see chefs pick up a lot of knives and work with food a lot, then I've learned this from experience, then micromanagement tends to happen. And that's one of the worst things you can do in a kitchen. Now to go back to that first part, the only school that really delivers almost ready chefs is the Culinary Institute of America. The CIA is a 2 to 4 year program. And I've known a lot of people that have done the 4-year program and coming out of it, they're absolutely phenomenal. I went to Le Cordon Bleu, or it was Western Culinary Institute. And, coming out of it, it was a great way for me to get my foot in the door. And when I was actually in culinary school, I was working for a chef in Portland by the name of Gregor Gourdet, Gigi. And then I would stage at Castagna under Justin Woodward. So I would kind of get this like fast-paced, modern Asian restaurant. And then I would get really, fine, detailed etiquette, focus-driven food and kitchen at Castagna. Justin's background was Noma, Mugaritz, and then he was at WD-50 for a while too. And so that was actually my first intro into what a Michelin star kitchen looks like. Castagna, you were rarely ever allowed to talk. The only time you were allowed to really talk was to the chef and ask questions. But, you'd be there for 14, 15 hours out of the day. And you would take your paring knife and just not tourné necessarily, but like chanterelles, you would classically clean them, getting all the dirt off the chanterelles. You would, it was very focused on etiquette. And, you're in your head for 12 hours out of the day, you can't talk to any of your colleagues. You just put your head down and you focus. And, I joke with a lot of youngsters now, but I don't think I've ever had so many conversations to myself when I was like, that's what happened when I was at that kitchen. So to kind of go back, no, I don't think any culinary student is ready to lead. I think that you need to really be thrown into the kitchens and the culture to understand what it takes to lead. Or you find an organization like, Blue Collar or another organization that sets you up to lead.
Yeah.
And, that's the hard part is what does it take to be a leader? How do you lead? Do you lead by example? Do you lead by, I've worked for plenty of chefs that are very quiet. They know what they want. And if you're not executing, like there's another person at the door that will execute for them. So, I think ultimately it's just for any young chefs that are listening to this right now, dive in, ask a bunch of questions if you can, make mistakes, learn from them, don't remake those mistakes. But the more that you can kind of be a sponge, after a while, you'll feel when it's ready, you'll feel that time when you're ready to lead.
How do you think, like, talking about people that go through that experience of like, they're chucking oysters for 8 hours straight or cleaning mushrooms all day or what, like those tasks I think are put in front of people to kind of, in some ways, like test, it's like a litmus test for, do you really want to be here?
Yeah.
Are you willing to, kind of suffer through the monotony of what, like the reality of any job? Like that's certainly the case in a restaurant kitchen, but I'm sure it's true in a lot of different industries. But like, do you think that, first of all, not everybody wants that.
Yeah.
But for people that do want it, like, do you think it's necessary in order to like find success in the industry? Like if you want to go through that, do you think that it's reasonable and justified for those people to turn around and then expect that of the next generation of upcoming chefs in their kitchen?
I think it's really based on what you want out of the kitchen, and what I mean by that is, shucking oysters for 8 hours sucks. Like I'll be the first one to admit it. There's a lot of tasks in the kitchens that are not necessarily that fun. But the reason we have to do them is for discipline, is for, knowing that going into a kitchen, like multitasking and understanding, mise en place that's your role. That's the most important thing. Right. And I think that 20 years ago, it was definitely applicable. But I think in the modern state of where restaurants are at right now, I don't think it's applicable. I think that we, and what I like to say is food over in Europe, like eating out it's kind of this tradition. It's this celebration, where in America, eating in restaurants is more of a commodity. We're almost $1 trillion business in restaurants right now. That's how much money goes into restaurants annually. It's one of the highest revenued businesses in the country. Yep. And so you look at it and we've completely made it like this amazing revenue source for people to go out and enjoy. But with that being said, with so much money getting dumped in, that means that more companies are being made to facilitate the less strenuous jobs. Pre-shucked oysters. Mm-hmm. One of the restaurants I was at a couple of years ago, we did these like country fried oysters with smothered in like hot honey and huckleberry vinaigrette, like as kind of a mignonette, right? And I got some flack about it, like, oh, they're not going to order oysters, da da da. And I was like, no, just watch, right? So of course it was one of the number one selling appetizers on there, and so we got rid of oysters on the half shell and we deep fried them as like we would deep fry, country fried steak, and we soaked it in buttermilk and all this stuff. And it was a great appetizer. We crushed through it. But that's the thing, right? Is that I knew that I didn't want to put my team through shucking oysters. So I got tubs of pre-shucked oysters. And that was the mentality, is, sometimes you have to work smarter, not harder. And that needs to kind of bleed through the younger generation. You look at chefs like David Chang, You know, he did the same thing. He cooked all over the world, really kind of put his feet in the ground, and now he's got a food line out of noodles and chili crunch and soy sauces. And he's just making it a little bit more accessible for these younger chefs to not have to go through what he went through, 20 plus years ago.
Yeah, and I think that there's a lot of good in that. But like you were saying earlier too, like the age of social media and shows, like on whether it's Ugly Delicious or Chef's Table on Netflix, like you don't necessarily see those chefs working the 14-hour days and doing nothing but shucking oysters. And you see like kind of the romanticism of the chef lifestyle without all of everything that went into it for years of getting them there, And we've seen that a little bit of, having some young people that come up and expect that to be their reality. But it doesn't just, obviously that doesn't happen overnight. And it might never happen. The people, those chefs or restaurateurs that are on those shows are there for a reason. Only a very, very few, select part of the industry and few operators ever get, recognized enough to even be on a show like that. Much less, the ones that never have any success in the restaurant business in the first place.
Yeah, and I think that's the hard thing is like, I have got two primary mentors in my life, Gregory Gourdet out of Portland, and then Christian Puglisi out of Copenhagen. And Gregory, he doesn't have a significant other right now. I love that man to death. I still talk to him as much as I can, and he just got done shooting with Gucci in New York. So I actually texted him. I was like, "Yo, when's that Gucci apron collab coming?" But he's fully made a huge name for himself in the culinary world. And then Christian over in Copenhagen, But when I was working for both of them, they were always there, and they were, Gigi was kind of on the line going through inventory, or he's in the office, or he was doing multiple meetings with kind of the higher ups at the restaurant downstairs. And, we were going, and he was obviously looking at BEOs for the private parties that were coming up. So there were rare times where I'd actually see a knife in Gigi's hand. It was more of like, all right, I've got my two sous chefs, and then I've got my full line. Like, this is what we need to do. So AM sous, tack prep. But G, like, I always saw him. I always saw him. He did not have a significant other at the time, or he was in and out of a relationship when I was working there. And Christian was the same way. But what these guys brought to the table was empathy. They fully understood what we were going through. They pushed us hard, but they knew when to kind of back off. It's almost like the Herb Brooks method, right? Like, you watch what Herb did in 1980 with the U.S. Olympic team, and he kind of created this common enemy, which, obviously, please don't take this as like anyone should do, but he created this common enemy in himself so his hockey team could kind of rally together.
Right.
And, sometimes that has to be the chef. The chef is never going to be the most liked person in the restaurant. That is what it is. Let's call a spade. But the chef has to maintain full control of operations daily to make sure that restaurant is running extraordinarily smooth. Getting with the SOM or getting with the director of ops, making sure that everything is where it needs to be. And, looking at both of my mentors, the one thing that they both had in common better than anyone else that I ever saw was they had a vision. They had a vision, and they knew what they wanted to execute. And it bled through to us, like I'd be on grill, and, at departure, we would do, 700 covers average a night, and the Trailblazers would come in. And it was a big time deal restaurant. And, I would probably grill off, 400 yakitoris, and I'd go through it that night. And so I'd plate up a yakitori, and it's 2 per order, and I'll put one in the window, and G comes over and he's like, "Davey, reglaze." And I was like, "What?" He's like, "So that bottom part doesn't have enough glaze." I was like, "Okay." So I'd come back, reglaze it, and he's like, "Perfect." But that's what G would see, is like he would look at every single plate that would come out if he could, and he would be immaculate with all of it. Same thing with Christian. When I was at Relay in Copenhagen, I'll never forget this. My first 2 weeks there was on Snack Station, and Snack Station was this turnip dish where it was thinly sliced turnips. And then we would do a 3% salt purge on them, and then we would sous vide them. So we would take, I think it was like 6 or 7 stacks of the turnip. We would stack it, so it was 4 rows on the bottom, 4 rows on top, and then we would sous vide it. I think it was like 73 Celsius for, I want to say, 45 minutes. And then we went to the ferment cave, if you will, and we grabbed green strawberries from last year. So we umebushi'd it. And so the snack in itself was just like this really great kind of soft, salty turnip with green strawberry umebushi and then nasturtium leaves. Well, what I had to do is I had to take 6 of the discs, and then the bottom disc, I put the green strawberry umebushi on. And then I layered the 5 on top, and I rolled it over. And then with my utility knife, I did about 25 really small lines in it, and it looked like a baby squid. Well, one night, chef realized I cut the turnips about 1/4 millimeter too thick. And so he came over and he's like, Davey, it's okay. Like, we're going to get through it tonight. He's like, but I need you to roll 10. And I was like, okay, chef, like, is there, VIP or what do you need 10 for? And he's like, Davey, just do what I say, please. And I was like, okay. So I roll 10 and I go get chef and let him know. And chef comes back and he's like, Davey, this is good, not good, not good, not good, not good, not good, this is good. I was like, okay. And he's like, you just cut them a little too thick tonight. And he's like, I want you to roll 10 more. I was like, okay. So I roll 10 more, and I'm thinking to myself, like, oh crap, I'm gonna be here early tomorrow slicing turnips. And so I roll 10 more, and he's like, this is great, this is great, this is great, this is good, this is good. See what you did here? Like, you didn't tuck it enough. And I was like, okay. He's like, from that 10 to this 10, this is what I want to see. I was like, okay. He's like, let's do it tomorrow. And that was it. He walked away. So it wasn't, he was like yelling at me.
Right.
He wanted to see the progression that I was going to make. And, after another week on Snack Station, I got promoted to Garde Manger. And so I was on Hotline, and I was the first ever stagiaire in the history of Relay to be promoted to Hotline and that fast. And I tell that story a lot to a lot of people because, chef was not upset.
Yeah.
He just wanted the best for me.
That sounds like good leadership.
Yeah. And he knew he could get the best for me, but it was how he approached it. And that was the same manner Gigi did with me too. Mm-hmm. I've worked for chefs that don't take the time, or I've worked for chefs that just yell at you constantly. And it's not good leadership at all. The chefs that don't take the time, that just expect you to do something, I would walk out of that kitchen in a heartbeat, because I'm not going to get anything out of it, and that chef's not going to get anything out of it. It's a really parasitic relationship, where Relay and Departure primarily, those were complete, they were symbiotic at its finest. G would come over, just randomly and look through my mise en place, pull out my low boys. And if I had one towel that was not folded, he would be like, Davey, not okay. And I was like, okay, yes, chef. And he's like, your towels are just as important as your mise en place. They have to be folded at all times. You need your towels. Do you want to burn your hands? Like, your hands are, it's part of your craft. And I was like, oh man, like, okay. So, we had this ongoing joke at Bissell. Like, I was kind of the towel monster. I'd see an unfolded towel, I would grab it and put it on my apron. And there were some nights where, like, I'd be on pass and I would have like 4 towels on my aprons, and they're like, Davey, give me the towel back, But Relay shaped me. Departure set me up for Relay, and that was the first time I really learned what restaurants was going to be like at Departure and at Castagna. Castagna, I wasn't there long enough to really get the full spectrum of what I could achieve. It was time for kind of me to say goodbye to Portland and kind of move to the next step. But to kind of go back to Departure, it was my first time having a notebook in my pocket. I'll never forget, getting the recipe book like my first week. And, this is me coming from Bozeman, going into a large city. And I had the recipe book, and one of the tenured chefs there, Sam, he worked at Noma, and then he worked at Morimoto in New York. Sam's like, Davey, I need the recipe book. And I was like, okay. I'm like, I'm almost done with it. And he's like, no, I need it now. And I was like, well, I'm almost done with this recipe. He's like, no, like what you need to do is you need to come back tomorrow. You need to get like a little notebook and all the recipes you need to write down in your notepad, because there's only one recipe book and we all need this. And I was like, wait, what? And he's like, yeah, this is not how this operates. Like you look at the recipe, you write it down in your book, and then you use your book. And I was like, oh, okay. I was really kind of taken back by that. And so Chef Ben, the number one sous chef, is like, Davey, you have to understand, like, we only have one recipe book for a reason. And we don't want to keep reprinting menus. We don't want to keep, creating new books. It's one book. You carry your own book, because your station is your mise en place. That's your station. No one should know that station better than you. Like that, you have to control your station.
Yeah.
And the same thing translated over in Copenhagen. And to go back to that turnip story, like Chef said the same thing. He straight up looked at me. He's like, Davey, when I come on your station, I expect to be the worst on your station. You need to be better than me. You need to be better than Chef Lisa. You need to be better than anyone in this restaurant at your station, because this is your station. Like you control what comes off this station. And that kind of was like, all right, like this is what chefs do, right? Like they nurture these young cooks and sous chefs, right? Like they nurture these young cooks into chefs. You have to be the best at your station, and then you're ready to move up.
Yeah. And I think that's the same concept applies, like we were talking about food trucks, right? It's like whether it's a single station in a kitchen or a food truck as it relates to a full brick and mortar restaurant, like building the discipline and the attention to detail in what, can be looked at as like a microcosm of the restaurant.
Yeah.
Looking at your station is like, hey, this might be a small part of this bigger restaurant, but it's your station, and you need to be able to apply this level of attention to detail and discipline to how you slice the turnips or how you're cutting whatever you were talking about with the strawberries or whatever. Like, that stuff is equally as important when you scale up to, restaurant-wide responsibility, right? And then you have to be able to apply that level of attention to detail and discipline to every corner of the restaurant.
Yep.
Like not just that one station, but what's going on at the front door and outside, in the parking lot and, with the finances and your accounts payable. And it's like, but if you haven't mastered applying discipline at a small scale, you're never going to be able to do it at a large scale.
100%. I mean, I think too, like you just look at like a server routine, right? Like if they have a section of the dining room and then they start going into a different section, I mean, it's going to cause mayhem. It really is. And that's the same thing that's how restaurants need to operate. Everyone does their mise en place. Yeah. Everyone controls their station with leadership, really making sure that everything is running smoothly.
Yeah, I think a lot of people, and I was the same way, like, and you probably were too, like, when I was I'm 23, 24 years old, I was like, I'm ready. Like I can open my own restaurant, And I think we have a lot of young people that probably feel the same way, whether they want to open their own restaurant or they just think like, oh, I've never served before, but I'm ready for a whole section. Yeah. Or I've, only been cooking for 6 months, but like I'm ready to be a kitchen manager or a chef. Like, let's just pump the brakes a little bit because, you do need time to learn that discipline and not only learn it, but like just get the repetitions in and build those systems for yourself and like figure out a routine that works for you as an individual and getting people to realize that, hey, that's not me saying because I did it, you have to do it. It's just that like, I want to set you up for success. And if I let you jump right into like trying to take on too much responsibility, you're not going to be able to apply that level of attention to detail to
100%.
10 things when you haven't first been able to do it for one thing. But I think a lot of people, particularly young people, struggle with that. They're like, no, like I want to whether they see it on social media or on Netflix or whatever, like I want to be the next, TV chef, or I want to, they, I guess, just have this vision in their mind of what success looks like,
Yep.
or this like kind of romantic idea of what they think they got into it for. And it's like kind of instant gratification thing,
Yep. Well, and I think too, like that translates really well. Like I think you said it like that, at least that last part too, like instant gratification. A lot of restaurant people thrive on instant gratification. They really do. I mean, I still thrive on instant gratification, right? And like, it's sometimes like we don't necessarily want to enjoy the journey. We want to get to that end part right away, and I think too, like, that's what got me so excited was service. I loved service. Like, I've primarily worked a lot of the restaurants I've worked in have been open kitchens. So I get to interact with the guests and see them and whatnot. And like, that's what kept me going day to day, when it was just like, oh man, dude, I've got 20 pounds of mushrooms I've got to clean and chop for the wok dish tonight. Like, this is going to take me an hour and a half. Like, what, I feel like I could be doing something better, but this is the first year that we're open. So like, I can't afford labor right now. And then I do it and I get to the service and I'm like, that was just so worth it. Mm-hmm. Like just getting to like see them and interact with them. And like, so the next day I was like, all right, Davey, like, okay, it's gonna be the same thing. Just keep going, keep pushing. And you're completely right. Like, we live in a social media day and age. Between TikTok and Instagram live stories and all this stuff, anyone can be kind of, an actor or like a movie star, right? And so, watching some of these people that have never worked a day in their life, but they've created cooking shows on TikTok, like, I'm such an asshole sometimes laying in bed watching it. I was like, your knife skills are so bad, like all this stuff, but then I read all the comments. It's like, God, you're so amazing, and and it's just like, they're just feeding that ego where, that one person can be whatever they want to be. Yeah. And Blaine, like, you're completely right. Like, when and I was the same way. I was 22, 23. I was like, oh man, I'm working for Gregor a day. Like, I can definitely open up my restaurant, And I wish I could go back in time and be like, dude, take more years and figure it out, because there's going to be things that you're going to come down the road and you're going to, be like, oh man, like, I wish I experienced this as a sous chef to see how this was handled, rather than just me trying to handle it for the first time it ever came across. Yeah. And what I've always told a lot of my young people that have worked for me is, every action has a reaction. So, you're cooking. If you mess up on, whatever you might mess up on a fried salsa fee with tempura batter, like, you have to react to either do it again, or what are we going to do to make sure that product is 100% perfect. Mm-hmm. And so it's just, it's an interesting time we live in, because cooking is so digital now. I mean, I think a year ago I saw an ad for online culinary school. Like, how does that work? Like, hold a knife here, and then do you like take photos of like your brunoise or your batons and stuff like that? Like, it just, to me, that made no sense. But that's just the day and age we live in. Could you imagine hiring a chef with an online culinary school degree? I think I would ask more questions of like, how it is from day to day and stuff like that. But that was another thing in culinary school, like, our whites had to be pressed every single day. Mm-hmm. And I'll never forget, I had a little stubble on my face, and, they were like, nope, go to the bathroom and shave. And I was like, with what razor? And they're like, the razor's in the vending machine. And I go out in the vending machine, and they're like, the Bic one blade, and like, I'm just cutting my face. So I come back and I've got like some blood on my coat, and the head chef's like, Davey, go home. Yeah. Like, take this as a learning lesson, but you cannot cook with blood on your coat. I was like, yep, I will see you guys tomorrow, clean shaven. Yeah. I mean, those are tough lessons learned, but they're so valuable. Like, I don't know if you know this, but I went to a military college. It's called the Citadel. And I mean, I wasn't in the military, and it was just, basically, it's like an exercise in personal discipline.
it's a military academy. They apply military style rules and discipline to like this corps of cadets. It's kind of like West Point or Air Force Academy, but there's no mandatory military service after you graduate.
Got it.
But like I needed that at that time for sure, because I didn't have like the internal, just like self-driven personal discipline to get me where I needed to be.
No.
But yeah, there was like lots of what seemed like kind of ridiculous standards that they hold you to, right? Whether it's like shining your shoes or your brass belt buckle or making your bed or whatever.
Yeah.
You know, room inspections, all that type of stuff that most people are like, what? Like, that's your college experience? Like, I needed that personally, because without it, I never would have developed the personal discipline that has really helped me find success. But it's not because I get up and like make sure I have hospital corners on my bed every morning now. Like that, obviously, the specifics don't matter. It's the overall practice of discipline, you know, and building in those routines to part of your life. And I think that's true, you know, probably with that experience of culinary school, whether it's like, okay, just remembering to shave. Obviously, you don't have to shave every day to work in a restaurant, but just remembering that those small details matter, right? And how they translate to, oh, wow, like I need to remember to pay that bill or to take care, you know, to do a performance review with an employee or whatever. Like those little details do matter. And especially as your scale of responsibility grows, you've got to become that much more disciplined because you've got all of those little details that matter to somebody that you have to keep up on. Right.
Well, and I mean, habits and discipline are the most important thing in any restaurant. It really is. I mean, you know, you look at mise en place, you know, everything in its place. You know, mise en place is how we thrive in restaurants. And, you know, I'm going to give a shout out to Brendan Kelly. Brendan worked for me years ago. He was about 2 years at Bissell. And then we sat and we talked, and, you know, it was kind of what was his next step. Like his tenure at Bissell was over. Like we both knew that he needed more, but I was able to facilitate that. So he went to Copenhagen. He kind of followed in my footsteps, and he staged at Amos and Cadeau. And so I gave him some hookups, and, you know, he took care of everything. And then he came back to the States, and, you know, he called me up and he's like, what's my next move? Like, I'm going to New York. And I was like, you don't need me anymore, bud. Like you're at this position where you're just better than I am right now, you know? But that was the thing, is like every single time he came into work, he would look at his prep list and he would do the same exact thing every single day. Like it was discipline. It was habit. And so he got a job offer from Thomas Keller.
That's awesome.
And he turned it down to go to Aska.
Wow.
And, you know, he's opening up his new restaurant now in Brooklyn. But last time I talked to him, you know, he was the CDC director for Roberta's. You know, it's one of the most nationally recognized, like, kind of pizza shops in the country. And, you know, he controlled a lot of that stuff. And he got his foot in the door because he worked at Blanca. And so, you know, like just watching him on social media, I'm so incredibly proud of him because that is who he wanted to be. And, you know, so Brendan, I'm shouting you out, buddy. But he really defined habit forming. And that's, again, mise en place.
And that's a great example of how discipline and routine and habits and like personal control and like, you know, agency over your day to day results in success in an industry that I think there's like this kind of cultural expectation that, you know, restaurants are full, like, you know, whether it's drugs and alcohol or like restaurants are run loose and, you know, just party atmosphere. It's like, it doesn't need to be like that, you know, and that's evidence that discipline and personal responsibility applied even in an environment where that people, I think, more often than not think of it as like this loose run industry. results in real success.
Well, I think ultimately, I mean, restaurants are very universal, and restaurant, but at the end of the day, it's a business. It's an absolute business, because at the end of the day, you got to get paid. You got to pay your employees. You got to keep everyone happy. It's a business. It's not just, here's an amazing plate of food, here's amazing service. That is, a huge importance of how to operate a business, but restaurants are businesses.
Yeah.
And, I was talking to a really talented chef buddy of mine, and he said something that like I had never heard of before, and it really opened up my eyes. He's just like, I love Anthony Bourdain. I've loved everything he's done for this food culture, except for Kitchen Confidentials. And I was like, wait, what? He's like, that book justified that partying and drugs, everything is a part of the industry, and it's okay, and it's not.
Yeah.
And I like took a step back, and I was like, oh my God, you're very much correct. Because you can't run a successful business with all of that stuff going on.
Yeah.
And it's not good. It's not good. Like I've always said that restaurants are it's like math. Math is the most universal language in the world. Restaurants are the most universal job offerings that you can apply for. And it's proven, right? Like I go to Copenhagen, and funny story is I was supposed to go to Oslo and work at the Three Mish Mamo. And funny story is 2 days before I was supposed to board the flight, I get a call from the sous chef, and it's like, hey, Davey, like your visa got denied. And I was like, wait, what? And he's like, yeah, Norway changed some labor laws. Like you can't come over here and work in the kitchen. And I'm already having like, small anxiety attacks. I was like, oh my God, Three Mish. Like I'm looking at pictures online. So I looked at Kirst, my wife, who I actually met working under Gigi. And I was like, I'm doing it. And she's like, no, this might not be a good idea. I was like, no, this has been on my like goal board for so long. Like I'm going to figure this out. And she's like, okay. So I fly over there, and I check into the hostel, and I go to the office, and I'm there literally like 8 hours, and I finally get up there, and it's like 5 minutes before closing, and they're like, yep, nope, we're not approving it. And I was like, okay. So that's when I call my buddy at Meadowwood, and he's just like, yep, let me make one phone call. And literally the next day I was hopping a flight to Copenhagen.
Wow.
But that was the thing, right? Is I had my knives packed. I was ready to cook anywhere.
Yeah.
And in a couple of days, I was cooking at Relay. And so, restaurants, they're businesses. They're going to get the best of the best if they want, but to showcase that it's this party atmosphere, it's not a good look.
Yeah. We actually have been reading Kitchen Confidential as a company here recently. And I agree, like, Anthony Bourdain is a great example of like, the kind of this caricature of the industry, particularly like when he tells these stories of the drug use and snorting cocaine in the walk-in and stuff that people start to think like, oh, so if he did it and he became so successful and like, renowned as this, this restaurant storyteller, like that's what I should do, But obviously his life ended tragically.
Yep.
And I think that he does share in that book like an evolution of like him as a person and as a chef, that he was learning over the years that, wow, like, his heroin addiction was getting in the way of being able to succeed, and like he had to eliminate a lot of those vices out of his life in order to succeed as a chef. But nonetheless, like, he does tell that story, and if people choose to focus in on like that element of his story and say, oh, then I can snort cocaine in the walk-in and be successful and be like Anthony Bourdain too.
Yep.
It's definitely a net negative to our industry for sure.
Yeah. I mean, look, like it's, addiction it's a big thing. I'm coming up on 1,000 days sober next month. And that was hard for me. Like I really let wine and alcohol kind of dictate some of my decisions at the restaurant, and that was like, looking back on it, like I'm so thankful that I kind of went through that to understand like what this industry can sometimes do to people. Yeah. And I think that ultimately, like, you have to kind of buy into the camaraderie. You have to buy into leadership if it's really good leadership at organizations. And, I know like Emily Hall, for example, I texted her a little while ago and I was like, how are things going? Cause she left Rev and she's like, I love blue collar. Like she just said the greatest things about your organization and everything like that. And I mean, it translates, right? Like, you and I have been getting coffee for years now. And, our talks about, your guys' organization and leadership and, my past, like it translates. And I mean, that's, I think what young chefs, they need to hold on to the good, but they also really need to learn from the bad, and I think again, with every action comes a reaction. And if chefs are not doing well, or if chefs are showcasing a terrible manner, you have two choices. You can either kind of mimic that in your future role, or you can learn from those mistakes and, realize like this is not okay.
Yeah.
And I've learned, like I joke with my wife sometime. I'm like, if we opened up another restaurant like tomorrow, it would be completely different.
Yeah.
It would be completely different. And that was the struggle we had with Bissell, was that I think I just tried to push too much of what I wasn't on that plate of food. Like I loved what we did, but at the end of the day, like it's not what I'm going to eat day to day to day.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What would you do differently if you open, like what hypothetically, if you open another restaurant, what would it be?
I think I would write a list of like what I love to eat and make more modern dishes out of it. And, like for example, we used to do this one dish at Bissell called, chicken skin tacos. And so, this dish was created literally in a month after we opened in 2016. And we took chicken skins, we cleaned them, and then we molded them into a heart-shaped taco shell. My cooks hated me for it because how much time it was. And that was the one thing I was like, this dish is just gonna get us on the map. Like it's a beautiful dish, But like looking back on it now, I'd be like, no, we're never doing that dish. It's a waste of labor, it's a waste of time, and like we gotta like just kind of find that niche, and like so I think like more of like savory beignets, like that's the stuff I want to do, kind of focus on my past, bagels and lox. How do I kind of recreate that to make it a really cool appetizer for that night, but really easy to execute both on prep and during service?
Yeah, we think a lot about kind of like the balance and the overall spectrum of like, what restaurants are capable of executing between the facility, the staff, the talent that you have to work with, but then also like what are customers willing to pay for too? Like why are customers coming into your restaurant? Are they the customers that are there for like the artistic and creative value of the food, or are they like basically just sustenance driven customers that like want big portions? I want my biscuits and gravy, or my chicken fried steak and mashed potatoes, and a big portion of it at a fair value. And a lot of that I think drives like who's going to cook the food, how it's going to be cooked, like how many cooks you need to have in the kitchen, of course your price point, how many customers you need to serve, how many seats you need to have in the restaurant to be profitable, all of that stuff. So like those are interesting variables about like basically how a restaurant gets positioned in the overall like spectrum of the industry, right? Like you can go 3 Michelin star, super fine dining. Basically people are paying for like the creative and artistic element of the experience. You don't go to a restaurant like that to like fill your belly.
No.
Or you're like on the, like casual dining, like barbecue, hole in the wall end of the spectrum, where you're like, just give me a lot of food at a fair price. And I guess the cool thing to me, I think where I appreciate the industry the most is where you're on more of that, I hate to call it like the lower end of the spectrum, but you know what I mean? Like lower price point, or like the more casual end of the spectrum, but like craft and care and attention to detail is still applied.
Oh yeah.
Like we mentioned Yellow House Barbecue earlier today. Like I think that's a great example of a place that's like serving, simple food and barbecue, but it's done at such a high level.
Yep.
Like, I think it's some of the best barbecue I've ever had.
Speaking of he's opening up Saturday. So if you guys are hearing this,
Nice.
you know, it's every Saturday, that's where he's at.
I'll be there. You know, because like it's food that I guess where maybe like I think when you walk into a 3 Michelin star restaurant, like justifiably the expectations are high.
Oh yeah.
And whereas like you walk into a place like Yellow House Barbecue, like, I mean, my expectations are high because I've been there before, but it's just a different, you know, like I think there's like a more of a gap where you can exceed people's expectations in that type of an environment, you know? So I'd be curious, like, I think when at Bissell, you were pushing more to like the upper end of that spectrum, right?
100%.
So would that play into like, if you were to ever open another restaurant, like, would you change, like, have a course correction there?
Bring some dishes back for sure. You know, I think the first year it taught us a lot of like what we could do and what we shouldn't be doing, you know? And I think the first year, the menu changed too much. I think that, you know, got some people really upset because they would come in one evening and then they come back a month later and that dish was gone. Mm-hmm. But we were so seasonal, you know, I mean, I had staff there at like 7 a.m. literally with a paring knife, just cleaning radishes. Excuse me. You know, and that was, you know, some of my favorite dishes at Bissell were like the most simple, truly the most simple. Mm-hmm. And it was like the wok-fired mushrooms. You know, literally all we did was we just applied super high heat to mushrooms. We made this gochujang vinaigrette, and then we finished it with, you know, a hearty lettuce, whether it was spinach or, you know, whatever was kind of in season. Mm-hmm. And then we took all the mushroom scraps and we fermented it to make our own soy sauce, and that was it. And so would I make that mushroom soy sauce again? No, I wouldn't. I would look at David Chang's line of soy sauces because that's kind of the what is available now. I mean, like, right. And I highlight this now to a lot of young chefs. It's like, use the other chefs' ingredients. Yeah. If Thomas Keller and David Chang are coming out with lines of food, they're going to be good. They might not be, holy smokes, this is amazing, but you can manipulate that to make that overall dish taste amazing. You know, it's funny because you're right. Like the 2 and 3 Mish, those restaurants, like, yeah, you'll leave hungry afterwards. But really, like, what you're paying for is that full-on experience.
Oh, yeah, for sure. I mean, Ellie and I watched one of the Chef's Table episodes. It was the Grant Achatz. Is that how you pronounce his name?
At Alinea.
And, I mean, like, it's art that you're paying for. Yep. You know, it's art, creativity. I'm sure the food is delicious, too. But, I mean, it's like going into, you know, like an art gallery.
Oh, yeah.
But it's experiential and interactive.
Oh.
Versus going into a restaurant because you're hungry and you want, you know, a stuffed pretzel at Sidewinders. No. Like, that's just a different thing altogether.
It's funny you say that because, you know, I'm finding more and more kind of like Michelin star trained chefs opening up diners.
Yeah, for sure.
Family oriented restaurants, because what it takes to be the best is it takes everything in you. Mm-hmm. You know, like you look at Rene Redzepi and he, on the outside, it's like he has a perfect life, right? He's the chef owner of literally one of the most generational restaurants ever. He has a loving wife. He's got kiddos, all this stuff. But then, you know, you hear stories about Rene and he's just like, he's up at 6. He doesn't leave the restaurant till, you know, midnight. You know, his routine is insane. You know, for him to do what he does on a daily, like I don't want that.
Right.
I know what I want, you know, and Relay. So I got to really experience like Copenhagen, and I took the train over to Sweden and whatnot. But Relay in itself was one of the most innovative restaurants I've ever been. And the reason I say it is we only had 1 star. We were the most affordable Michelin star restaurant in Europe. But what Chef did that blew people away. And if you guys can get his cookbook, please get Relay. It's one of the most brilliant cookbooks I've ever like read. But what Christian did is he built drawers into the dining room table. So he basically, we could seat, I think 95 for, we were fully booked that night. So he had drawers built in the table, and so you sit down and you open the drawer, and the menu's in the drawer, your napkins in the drawer, all your silverware is in the drawer. He mathematically knew that if he built those drawers, he could save X amount on labor by not having to, put down at the next fork, the next knife for the next course. And so, half hour, for one server, one FOH member to get ready, they would just restock the drawers.
Right.
So on the next turn, we pull out the empty drawer, we take the new drawer and stick it right in. And that was it. So all FOH had to do was focus on wine.
Drawers. Oh, yeah.
For service.
Right, yeah.
And then the chefs delivered the food.
Cool.
And so I asked more about why he did it. And he's just like, Davey, we had no money. Yeah. We developed a restaurant in Norrborough, which at that time was, a terrible part of Copenhagen. I mean, it was an old Hell's Angels bar that his first 2 weeks that he was open, a guy that got stabbed came in the back kitchen asking for help.
Good Lord.
And so now you look at where Relay was, it recently closed. He kind of is shutting down some of his restaurants right now. I think just consolidating. He just had a new kiddo with his now wife. And you look at that neighborhood, and a lot of has changed because of what he brought into that neighborhood.
Yeah.
And that's just the power of food. I mean, just seeing that he opened a restaurant in a terrible part of the neighborhood, and now it kind of reminds me of the cannery in Bozeman. It's very lively. It's very youth driven. There's a lot of cool shops. When I was there, I would walk into shops all the time, pottery shops, book shops, and then you got Meekler, one of the most renowned beer masters of all time. And he's got a shop right down the road. And so, for everyone listening, if you really want a life in the food industry, first off, just know what you want.
Yeah.
Be happy, because food can bring so much joy if you do it right.
Yeah.
And if you do it wrong, learn from those mistakes. And that's what I really got out of Copenhagen the most, was just etiquette, really finding that passion for me, what I wanted to do.
Yeah, there's no wrong answer. I mean, those people that want to dedicate their lives to 3 Michelin stars and that level of attention to detail and artistry and creativity, I'd respect the hell out of that, It's just a different path than what we do personally, but that's not to say it's better or worse. It's just different, which there's still creativity and artistry in what we do too. It's just it's a different part of that spectrum. And, but it is interesting, like you were saying, how so many of these world-renowned chefs, we had a guy that worked at Tanglewood that went and worked for Sean Brock, and now I think his focus is definitely shifting more to that casual end of the spectrum, but that's not he got known for something very different, so it's kind of interesting to see maybe the industry shifting towards hey, let's go back to kind of more casual, approachable food, just done at a high level with attention to detail and care and craft.
Let me ask you something. Would you rather eat this incredible cheeseburger with maybe some melted Gouda or something, or would you want to eat a 3-mish meal every month? For me, I already know the answer. I'm gonna go cheeseburger.
Yeah,
that's just for me. I get more nostalgic out of eating a cheeseburger than I do a 3-mish meal. Yeah,
I agree. I mean, I think I appreciate to me, they're two very different things. Yeah. I would love to go to Alinea and see that in the same way that I would pay to go see, a Broadway show or a beautiful art display or, an art museum or something like that, art gallery.
Yeah.
I don't almost don't even really compare them, as would I do that or go to some world-renowned pizza joint, I love pizza, and if I'm hungry, I would love to go do that. but for kind of a different reason.
Yeah, for sure.
You know what I mean?
Well, and I think too, like, a lot of these 3 Mich stars, or even 2 and even 1, like, they're using like insane kitchen technology. Like, have you ever seen like the new Rational like line come out and stuff like that?
Not in person, but I've heard a little bit about it.
It's, I mean, just the combi ovens alone.
Yeah.
Like, I've never been so scared to ever use an oven until I went to Copenhagen. And then of course, they use Thermomixes over there. And I've never been more scared to use a blender until I used it. And, I have a Thermomix at my house right now, but like, I can make hollandaise with a Thermomix in 2 minutes.
Yeah.
I just set it to 65 degrees Celsius, throw some egg yolks in there and butter, and it emulsifies it for me. And in 2 minutes, I have perfect hollandaise. Mm-hmm. But that's also another thing too. A lot of these kitchens have that, really kind of step that level up a little bit more. And I had an Electrolux combi at Bissell, and if I needed to institute 35% steam at 400 Fahrenheit convec, like, I could do that.
Yeah.
And it was a game changer for a lot of the proteins that we would roast, or bones that we needed to roast for stocks and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So, a lot of these chefs that are in the 3 Mich, I will always tell young people, like, go stage for at least a week in a Michelin star restaurant. Denver just got stars. My buddy is he's the head chef at Wolf's Taylor. He just got his first star. I've known him since the Gigi days in Portland, 12, 13 years ago. He has been so deserving of a star for so long. He's very detail oriented. He's very routine focused. But that's what these young guys, these young people will learn. It's just kind of that etiquette with routine.
Yeah.
But a lot of it too is like, they have fun gadgets. They have really fun gadgets, like the Rationals, the Thermomixes, the Pacos, like all of that stuff it's fun to see.
And I think being able to like turn that into a successful business model has so much to do with like your demographics, like your audience.
Yep.
Like, who are there enough people in your immediate area that are willing to pay for that?
Yeah.
And like see value in, because I mean, it's not going to be inexpensive.
No,
you're going to have to go pay a premium for a smaller portion, and and be happy to do that.
Yeah.
Because you're paying for the creativity and the time and attention to detail that people are putting into that.
Yep.
And I think that's just going to like continue to like, kind of exponentially get, even more and more significant, because like labor scarcity.
Yeah.
Like, not only is labor per hour getting more and more expensive, but there's fewer and fewer people in our industry, like young chefs, that really want to shuck oysters 8 hours a day.
Exactly.
So like, how are those restaurants going to continue to operate at such a high level?
I think the well-renowned restaurants will stay.
Mm-hmm.
I think that in the next 10 years, personally, for what I see, I don't think those restaurants are going to last. Yeah. I think it's going to be more of the accessibility restaurant, like the restaurant that I can call or order online and get a good meal.
Yeah.
Another thing too is I have 4 kiddos. So a lot of our day to day, we're in hockey right now.
Right.
So Monday, Wednesday, it's back-to-back hockey. Mm-hmm. We usually get home at 7:30, 8 o'clock. Well, if we haven't put something in the crock pot, we got to find something fast.
Yep.
And, don't get me wrong, like, I love taking my wife out for date night, but that also, as a parent, financially, we've got to pay for a sitter, we got to pay for a meal, like all of this stuff. So those finer restaurants, like for us, we'll maybe do it once or twice a year when we go on vacation. That's it. We don't live, obviously, in a large metro. Those larger metros, I would imagine it's kind of the same thing with most families and whatnot. But then you have youth. Like, do you really expect, a young person to drop hundreds of dollars on a meal?
Yeah.
I think, ultimately, I think we're going to see kind of the diners come back into play quite a bit. Mm-hmm. I think that we're going to see, and this is just me speaking, I think, again, we're going to see the prominence of really good food at an expedited rate. How can we make it faster to hit people with either delivery services or just push it out the door?
Yeah.
It's funny, like, I see all these young kids, and I mean, I'm still pretty young myself, but like, they are constantly on their phone.
Yeah.
Like, we were at a wake last night, and then afterwards, we went to a party and I saw all the young kids just in the corner. They were talking to each other, but they were definitely, on their phone looking at social media and all this stuff. And I kind of think that has to translate over to the culinary world now, how easily it is to order online and all that stuff.
Yeah.
So
I agree. I hate that. I hope it doesn't like totally push out the experiential restaurants, like I think that being able to go to a place as a destination experience is so valuable, and it's such an important part of our industry. Like, I mean, there's a place and a very important aspect to having like restaurants as a utility, like order online, quick service, great portions, fair value. Like the world needs that too. But the world also needs places like that Italian restaurant over in Red Lodge. I forget the name
Casina.
of it. Yeah. Like Ellie and I've been there a couple times, and it's like, of course we're not going there on a regular basis, but it's an experience. You go, you don't expect to have this like beautiful, delicious Italian restaurant in a small town like Red Lodge, or like, she actually just set up a reservation for the place over in Livingston that was
Campione.
Campione.
Yeah.
So I'm excited to check that out, So maybe that's where those things happen, just like on small scale kind of passion project type of restaurants where, you might have to drive an hour to get there.
And I agree. I don't think those restaurants are going to go anywhere. But I also think that I'm a big football guy. The NFL is expanding tenfold. Like look at SoFi Stadium. SoFi has created a stadium where it's kind of a mini mall. And so what I've been noticing too is a lot more food halls are popping up. More activity focused for people to come and be communal. And it's funny because, my ex-stepdad and whatnot. And that was something that I always kind of talked to him was about like, how do we create something a little bit more communal that has more to offer so people can just come, and I think that's what everyone wants, but I'm not here to speak for everyone. If I could bring like my kids to an area where like there is some sort of like kid zone that I know, like look at Jump Time, for example. If Jump Time had like 2 or 3 like food trucks outside and had a bar upstairs, that'd be the busiest place in town. You let your kids, jump on a trampoline, you get a smash burger and a beer, you could be there for at least 2 hours.
We've seen that a little bit at the Market Building, and how like the restaurants definitely drive the foot traffic. Like we were closed for a couple of days last week for our Employee Appreciation Day, and like the whole place was a ghost town. And I'm not like, that's not a slight at the retailers. Like they're great. I love the retail stores there, but they don't drive the foot traffic in there. So, but on the flip side of that, like we recently read an article about some of these like food hall destinations that are just like basically kind of, this was in Texas, but
was it the Post in Houston?
I don't remember. No, I don't think so. I think this one was in the Dallas area, but but they're kind of, some of those places are crumbling if they're only built around restaurants. It's like there's a sweet spot of like combining restaurants with retail or like experiential services, recreation, things like a stadium or a Jump Time type of like family friendly experience. I think if it's like purely a food hall, they can, and especially if it's in a remote area, there can just be not enough of a reason for people to go there,
And I totally agree with that. I mean, I remember growing up and there was this place called the Casino, and it had great wings, great beers. But what my brother and I, like what we loved about it so much was the arcade. So we would go, and I mean, we would spend 2 hours there. Like my brother and I would be it was packed all the time because it just had really good wings, really good kid food. And we would literally be at the arcade constantly. Like we would beg our parents to go there. And, this is back in the early 90s when, obviously Xbox and all of that stuff wasn't really a viable option. It was 64, shout out to GoldenEye. But That's all we wanted to do. And I mean, even my kids today, like we go to the mall at least, I would say once every 2 weeks to go to the arcade.
Well, that's when Sidewinders first really became successful in Jackson. Like my father-in-law tells this story a lot, where like when he and Denise first opened that in 1997, it was just a bar mainly. But when it moved to the current location across the highway in the Hillside building, he built in this like kids game room.
Got it.
And it became this like family friendly like combination American Grill sports bar concept with a family friendly aspect to it.
Yeah.
And then it took off.
Got it. Okay.
And so like blending all those pieces together where like, hey, the adults can, veer off to the left when you walk in, go sit in the bar and not have to sit around the kids, and they can watch their game and drink their beers or whatever. Or if you're a family, parents with 4 kids, like walk in the dining room, your kids can go play in the game room and they're safe and they're entertained, and everyone, can have kind of an equally but separate, beneficial experience. That was like the sweet spot for that concept.
Okay. I mean, it's awesome. Like it really is. Like, and I mean, again, my memories of the casino was exactly that, right? Like my parents would be sitting at the table, my brother and I would be in the arcade, and then when we had to leave, like we hated it. We hated leaving just because like we wanted to, Cruising USA and like all those classic games.
Yeah, I remember
like,
that.
That's exactly what we wanted to do.
Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting to think about that and then applying it to the scale of like a larger development, like where we're at with Ferguson Farm, and combining all those different elements. I mean, that applies in a single restaurant location like Sidewinders, but then also for the development as a whole, like you need restaurants, you need retail. I think we would love to have some form of, recreational component there, whether it's like a bowling alley or, like I think Topgolf doesn't apply in Bozeman, but those places that do have Topgolf, like those are big draws for people, and those concepts work so well.
I know. Well, another thing too is one of my colleagues just met with a bar golf simulator area, and I've been seeing more golf simulators come up right now. And he was telling me that the guy said like the golf simulator is packed all the time at nights, especially on the weekend nights. Like people want to come in, get a couple pitchers of beer, they hang out with. And the thing with golf simulators too is like it's honestly like a great double date kind of ordeal.
Right.
I love axe throwing, but like you get some alcohol involved, like I'm gonna step back a little bit, So I mean, I completely agree with you. Like I think that those outlets they need more options than just food.
Have you heard about chicken and pickle?
What is it?
We were in Dallas, I don't know, last year, and we saw a few of these places. They're enormous. Like, I don't even know how many total square feet. But it's pickleball, like numerous pickleball courts, maybe like, a dozen or more pickleball courts, and then like a chicken restaurant and a bar. So it's like Topgolf, but applied to pickleball. And these places are killing it.
I bet.
It's crazy, man. Like a huge campus of like some indoor, some outdoor pickleball courts, beautiful, facility, multiple bars. It's pretty crazy. But
that's awesome.
That's like the sweet spot of like recreation, family friendliness, food and drinks and
So let me ask you this. If you had an ideal vision, like, because I mean, you and Ellie got Little Tucker now. Like, if you guys, like, what would be a place for you guys to go? Like, if you went to dinner and there was gonna be foot traffic, what would you want to see that foot traffic to have?
Like, if we're taking the family out to dinner, I mean, I guess we're kind of biased, but like when we do go out in our restaurants, I'll use those as examples. As when we go out as a family, Sidewinders is always like the one where we're like, like we should come here more often. Like I love the food at Tanglewood and Hachi, and but Sidewinders just like is so much easier as a family because it's louder and casual, and we don't feel like if he's pitching a fit, like we don't feel like we stand out, or we're bothering anybody. So I think that's that fits really well for us where we're at, you know, in starting a young family and everything. But yeah, like obviously date night calls for a different type of experience. Not that we don't like Sidewinders as a date night, but sometimes we like going to other places, you know. I don't really, you know, nothing against other Bozeman restaurants, but I can't really, I guess if we're going out as a family, you know, sometimes we'll go to like, you know, maybe one of the breweries we like. Mountains walking is a really fun place. But yeah, generally we're more homebodies when it comes to like family dining stuff.
It's easy, right? Like you have the comfortability at home. And I think too, like, you know, this ties into food for me is streaming platforms. You know, I remember as a kid, like I grew up in Cleveland, Ohio. I grew up in Shaker Heights, Ohio. And so there was a place called Shaker Square. And Shaker Square had great restaurants. They had great shopping centers, and they had a movie theater right there. But the RTA, like our train, would cross right through there. And so I remember all the time on the weekends, you know, we'd go out to Tony Romo's, or we'd go out to whatever one other local restaurant, and we'd stop at the Birkenstock store or just whatever store it was, and then we'd go in and go see a movie. Well, now with streaming platforms, you know, I can watch the new Marvel movies on Disney Plus. So for me, knowing that I've got kids at home and we can all do it together, I'm gonna order food to get delivered and we're gonna situate it at the house. You know, so all of these streaming platforms, they're changing how we eat as well, in my personal opinion.
For sure. We just did some like audiovisual improvements at Sidewinders, and we're looking at replacing our big projector screen because it's good but not great, and considering our options for what we put there instead. And you can go up to like 100-ish inch like regular whatever like LED TV now, but or you can go up to like a mega like kind of Megatron style TV wall, like you would see, you know, in like a sports stadium. That's what they use at places like Topgolf. They're like, you know, 200-inch TVs or something. They're these like LED panels. They're a lot more expensive, but the guy made a good point. He's like, look, everybody has a big TV in their house now. So if you want to like have a unique experience that people can't have at home, you kind of have to go with these like giant screens now, something that they're not going to see, you know, in their living room. And for like a sports driven place like Sidewinders, it's definitely something that we're having to consider.
Yeah. I mean, you know, if you create that destination place, people are going to come. They really are. They really, really are. Yeah,
man. Well, I appreciate everything that you do and everything you've done, and getting to know, you know, your story and your background, and it's been really cool to get to know you.
Appreciate it. Likewise.
Thanks for being here.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Yeah. Thank you so much. So I'm excited for more coffee talks and go from there.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I mean, I know we didn't really get to talk too much about Spot On and everything that you're doing right now, but maybe we're already an hour and a half in, so maybe on the next one we could kind of talk more about, you know, how you've transitioned out of the restaurant space and into, you know, kind of the support role. And
I mean, really quick too, like tech is dominating the restaurant field right now.
For sure.
You know, I was talking to a U.S. foods consultant, and she just said that the past like 3 years, it's mind blowing what has changed. So yeah, let's do it.
All right, man. Well, thanks again.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Yeah. Thanks for tuning in to another episode of the Service First podcast. Join us on our mission to spread the word and inspire others to lead with a service first mindset by sharing this episode with your friends and colleagues. Don't forget to rate, review, and subscribe to the Service First podcast on your favorite platform. We can't wait to connect with you and continue this important conversation about service, community, and leadership.